I think one of the other things that was helpful is I would say like the current conditions of the market, right? So if you look at what's happening in the brokerage space, the industry is growing, right? So the amount of revenue flow into brokerages is growing every year, but most of that revenue, the new revenue, is actually flowing to new businesses, right? To like new startups and small brokerages. So there's a lot of young men and women who are starting brokerages right now, who are coming at it from a very similar perspective to the way that you and I are building our businesses, right? Like maybe they're not hiring a bunch of engineers and building the software themselves, but they know that the industry is digitizing and that in 10 years, the brokers that are dominating the market are not going to look like the brokers that are dominating the market today. And so they're looking for technical solutions to these problems.
You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. New episodes of Freight Famous will be airing about every 2 weeks. On this podcast, we talk with guests about how they build, scale, and automate their trucking businesses. I'm your host, Justin Bailie. I'm a co-founder here at Rose Rocket, and I'm super excited today to introduce my guest today, Bharath Krishnamoorthy from Axle Payments. B, as he's often called, is the CEO and co-founder of Axle, a payments automation and financing platform for freight and logistics, and largely focused on the freight brokerage industry. So our freight broker customers, you're going to want to listen in on this one. He's a graduate from Columbia Law School, lawyer, and James Madison University. B worked in the M&A space, and again mentioned as a lawyer before starting Axle with his co-founder and, from what I understand, the high school best friend, Sean. So that is the episode today, and with us now is Bharath. B, what's up?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Happy to be here.
Yeah, cool. So would love to get started a little bit on your background. One thing that I've been getting some feedback on the podcast recently is, we're still new at this in a lot of ways, and I think when we first started, I was trying to really kind of get the sort of the guest story and just get a little more, as actually a word was used by one of the people who gave me feedback, was use some more levity if I could. So we're doing this live time. We're gonna try and crack this today. So I'm hoping that sort of through the conversations today, I want to learn about Axle. I want to learn about cash flow and capital markets, but also want to learn about you and how you got here and why this is an interesting problem to work on and all that type of stuff. So, so if we can go there, let's, what's your background? How did you end up here, working as in for lack of a better term, sort of factoring, organization or founding a factoring organization?
Yeah, it's a pretty roundabout way to get here. I guess professional background, studied economics in college, went to law school here in New York, and then practiced as a lawyer at a corporate firm here in the city for about a year and a half, which obviously doesn't have too much to do with starting a broker factoring business. But I think probably the more important part of my background is that I had started a bunch of small businesses prior to this with Sean Vo, who's now my co-founder. He's my high school best friend. We've been getting into trouble in various forms for, over a decade now, 15, 16 years. And the plan had always been to build something bigger and more meaningful and find an opportunity where we could really just pour our effort into and create something cool. And the first sort of big attempt at it we made was this pricing solution for the intercity bus industry. And it's just because we had been riding these buses back and forth from, New York to DC all the time. Greyhound, Megabus, there's dozens of regional operators like that. And we could see that it was an industry that was, at least providing us a lot of value, but that was doing it in a way that was clearly very analog and outdated. So we put this product together. It started generating, a good amount of money. It was doing about $8,000 or $9,000 a month in revenue. But we realized it wasn't going to get too much bigger because it's just a very small industry. And that kickstarted this process of about 2 years where we had already quit our jobs. We had suddenly met a bunch of founders and investors who worked broadly in the transportation tech ecosystem. And we were looking for what this opportunity was going to be. And we cycled through a lot of different things that didn't work for one reason or another. And it wasn't really until 2019, mid 2019, that we stumbled onto this opportunity, and it kind of checked all of our boxes. It was one that leveraged the backgrounds we did have, right? The legal background is helpful here. The fintech background my co-founder has is very helpful. The relationships we built in the ecosystem have been helpful. It's a mission we feel good about because it's allowing us to address cash flow problems, right? Which is one of the most salient problems that a small business owner faces at a very large scale. And like we talked about earlier, it's in an industry that has that's just like a really critical component of the economy, right? There's the potential to do a lot of good if we can execute well here. And so it was, off to the races after that.
It's interesting. So I don't know if you remember this, but you and I spoke right around 2019, actually. And I remember So, and I remember even what I told you guys on the call, and I remember you guys were. That probably would have been about 2019, right, when you were getting started.
It was right when we were thinking about this, yeah.
Yeah, and so some gave you the bad advice to reach out to me for advice, and I really liked the outcome of this because my response to you was, don't do this. My response was, the brokers are there's a lot of risk in that space, and that was going to be very, to me, for academically, it felt like cost of capital on the backdrop of the risk profile was going to be borderline non-competitive. Is how I, in my 5 minutes of thinking about it, had come to be, and I often like when I give. Because really all you're doing is saying, hey, here's what we're thinking about. What's your opinion? Because, I can I've been doing this for a long time. It's just one version of truth that I have myself, right? And I love when I give advice like that says, and I probably didn't say blatantly don't do it, although I may have. It would have been more to the, you should probably think about this a little deeper. But you went and did it anyway. And I really, really like that because it shows just a level of conviction. And that you're doing the research and you're crowdsourcing the information. It wasn't just you talk to one person, because I think it's easy to get stuck into when we go to someone for advice that maybe has been there, done that, or you're perceived to have been there, done that. We can put a lot of unnecessary weight in one person's opinion. And I know for myself, actually, I can get very easily dissuaded from something quite quickly. I don't know, even if I had that conversation, if I was you and I had the conversation with me, but I was my own mind, I that might have hurt me in a sense where I would have looked at doing something else, because I can be very sort of individually impressionable. So anyway, I really remember seeing you guys kind of start to roll that out, because I think you actually started sending me some investor updates, which I was really proud of you guys for pushing that through, and then saw a couple things break and it looked like things started to go really well. I saw some capital raises happening, and obviously it looked like you guys were growing and doing a going concern business. So where are you today? Let's talk a little bit about, how Axel's doing now, and maybe a little bit about your customer base. And I'd like to also spend some time on what you sort of learned. So from the conversation, and I kind of turned you on to this idea of high risk. How have you worked through that? Because in my mind still, I'm interested in how you solved for that.
Yeah. So I do remember that conversation, and I think it's cool that, a couple years later, we're now on this podcast together. Yeah. And I actually think that conversation was helpful, even though we didn't necessarily take your advice. I think when getting advice from people, it's not their recommendation that's really important. It's the reasoning behind their recommendation, right? And we had heard from a lot of people who are in the factoring industry, oh, don't do brokerage, it's a bad idea, but who couldn't really articulate why it was a bad idea. And there's a lot of different reasons that could be true, right? Maybe there's just no money to be made. Maybe, like you said, it's actually a question of risk, and you're not going to be able to keep your loss rates in check. There could be plenty of other reasons. And it was through the conversation with you and, one or two other people who all kind of honed in on this idea of risk, that it became clear, okay, there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of value to be created if we can deliver this product to brokers. But there is this large question of risk that we need to get around, right? How do we eliminate that risk when servicing this client segment? And, my co-founder and I sat down, really tried to understand what are the different sources where this risk is coming from? What can we build to sort of mitigate that risk? And then, made a bet on it, and it's panned out really well, right? So last year, our cumulative loss rate for the year was literally zero. Right, this year so far, still literally zero. So we've put over $100 million to work in that time and have collected on every single penny, which is, unheard of in this industry, even when servicing customer segments that are quote unquote less risky, right? So I think it kind of made it clear to us that there's this one hurdle we have to jump that opens up this large opportunity to us. And it's like I said, it's been off to the races since then. So the team is, well over 50 people now. We're processing, over $10 million a month in invoices. Plenty of happy customers, NPS score of 70, right? I think that's one of the stats I'm most proud of, is that our clients overall are just really, really happy to be working with us, which is, a good sign that we're delivering real value to the market. And
I think we haven't dug super deep into this, and I think just in case it has been maybe blushed over, it's important to call out here that, actually I'm going to ask this because this is what I think, but to clarify, do you guys work exclusively with third party, with brokers?
We don't work exclusively with them. We do have some carriers on the platform, but we work almost exclusively with them. So like all of our marketing sales efforts are targeted towards brokers.
Sure.
The vast majority of our client base is brokers. But what will happen is that we interface with a lot of carriers on behalf of our broker clients. And many of them will reach out to us and be like, hey, this product looks really sleek. I can't find anything else like it on the market. Can you guys work with us? And, we'll take them on here or there. So, we do have some carrier clients, but it's the bulk of them are freight brokers.
What type of freight brokers do you work with? Like, what does a perfect customer look like for you guys? Or what's that size? Or I don't know, I'm not sure how you think about it as firmographics or what that might be.
If you look at sort of the brokerage market, there's, depending on where you get the data, there's somewhere from like 20 to 90,000 brokers, but that last 70,000 are sort of inactive businesses, right? So there's something like a little over 20,000 real freight brokerages, and the vast majority, like about 20,000 of them, are doing less than 25 million a year in revenue, right? And that makes up, actually, that long tail makes up half of all of the revenue flowing into this segment, right? So it is a very long, robust long tail. That's who we service, right? And we service sort of that whole spectrum. So we have clients that are like very tiny startup brokerages who signed up with us and then moved their first load. And then we have clients that have been around for, 4 or 5+ years and who are doing, millions a month in revenue.
I think about from my own experience in this, and I think there's a ton of value here. And I know when I had a brokerage now, 10 years ago, maybe more even at this point, there wasn't a product like this. Like I remember actually thinking about this from just what we were sort of spending on cash flow management, quite frankly, was, a product like this made sense. So I remember going out to market looking for something, and it was just a difficult product to find. And so I'm going to use some sort of layman terms here because I'm not super familiar with how all this works. But at the time it was, you could do it, but you could only get margin back. And I'm assuming that's how you guys do it too, right? That's how you sort of mitigate the risk here. It's the margin you make on the load is what we advance you, and then you keep the rest, and then you pay the carrier directly?
Yeah, we'll pay the carrier directly.
Right. And does that, from a broker that's starting out, how do they reconcile that in their business? And I know you're not... So there's what you're supposed to do and what you do. And so there's this idea that as much as you're going to pay that carrier in 30, 35 days, 40 days even realistically, you're hoping to kind of create a bit of a spread between the cash flows. You're hoping some of that, that you can get paid quicker, you can hold on to some of that money and possibly even put it to work in a really short sort of turnaround time and then pay the carrier. You do use a lot of the money that isn't yours because the margins are such in brokers, they're not gigantic, that you're using some of that money potentially as cash flow. Now, that can get super dangerous downstream. But how does a new business get started doing that? I guess it's just simply there is enough money in there to make that business work when you're small enough that you make $400 on a load, that's okay to kind of get advanced that, and that's enough for the day, and that keeps it going. Like, I just feel like there must be conversations you're having with people who have some concern around even the optics of just having a bank account that's got, $900,000 sitting in it, even though 800 of it's not yours. There's just, how do you guys think about that, or how do your customers think about that?
Yeah, I think what's changed a lot from maybe when you were running that brokerage to today is this dynamic around how the carrier wants to get paid. So, 4 or 5 years ago, that strategy worked, where you could take, as a brokerage, you could take that money in from the shipper, maybe spend some of it, use some of that working capital, and then pay the carrier in 30 days. But today, many carriers are expecting quick pay, right? And especially when they're working with these smaller brokerage, the long tail, that's one of the things they're expecting in order to choose them over someone like Uber Freight or whoever else, right? Which means that from the broker's perspective, they have to get that cash out the door immediately, right? So now it's actually like they need to pay the carrier before the shipper pays them. And when we come in now and can make that advance, it's kind of like a win-win-win, right? For us, we're able to make that payment to the carrier, so it eliminates that risk. For the brokerage, they no longer need to worry about handling that like payments processing, like collecting the check, mailing it out. We'll handle all of that for them. And then for the carrier, they can get paid immediately, right? Which is ultimately what they want. And they can get it whatever's easiest for them, right? Whether it's a check or electronic payment. And that dynamic is what keeps everyone really happy and makes it easy for those brokers to continue to attract and retain the best carriers.
So when we're thinking about today's market, I'm going to just kind of pivot off of that a little bit. But I think that was a really actually good way to think about that, and that's really interesting. And I for sure, the sort of competitive advantage of money now. You see it permeating across all business sectors. Every business, technology, fintech, basically, right? How do we move money instantly? How do you get paid instantly? It's sort of. It's not. I was going to say it's in vogue, but that would be unfair to suggest that it's going to go away. And it's just here. That's just what it is, because the apparatus and the technology is in place to facilitate these types of things. So cash flow is. It's not even like king anymore, because it's like there is no cash flow. It's just immediate pay.
Jeff Bezos had this thing that he would tell everyone at Amazon, which is like, one thing that we know is going to be true forever is that customers are going to want more selection. They're always going to want more selection. They're always going to want cheaper products, and they're always going to want those products faster.
Yep.
And as long as we build a business that optimizes those three things forever, we're going to be able to take over the world. And I think, what I'm hearing from you is kind of a parallel in the world of money, which is that people always want cash faster, right? Yep. And that's never not going to be true. It was true in the past. It's just easier to do it now because we can move these funds electronically. These systems now speak to each other in a way that they didn't before. And so that expectation about what is considered fast is continuing to, I guess, grow. We want things even faster than we did last year. And last year we wanted them even faster than we did 10 years ago.
Are you seeing that in your business without you forcing the issue from a value prop perspective, but actually having people come to you proactively saying, can we do this faster?
Yeah, that's like, when we were like very initially getting this off the ground and I was doing the sales myself, that was one of the things that made us feel like, oh, there's definitely something here, right? Because we had this like narrative that we were telling our investors about, like, hey, here's where we think the market is going, and this is why we think this is going to work. And we would hear these small brokerages like pick up the phone and then tell that narrative to me, and they're like, hey, my carriers want to get quick pay. I don't have the cash to do it. Will this allow me to give them quick pay? And we're like, yes, exactly. That's what we're here for. And that's sort of like how in sync the thing they were looking for with our sort of thesis on the market is what made us feel really confident to just double down on it.
I'm curious how you overcame not having background in the space, talking to a market that I think puts a lot of value in domain expertise. How did you find that when you were originally doing sort of founder sales at the beginning and maybe being a little vague on the billions of what seems to be like pieces of terminology, and it's a bit of a club, right, in transportation, and I think, and I say this coming from the other side, that I used that a lot early days and during founder sales as, I understand this space, I can speak your language, I've got user empathy, and I felt the air pressure in the room would come down a lot by saying, like, I know where you've been. This is more than just some arrogant startup founder who thinks he knows everything about the world, and you're dumb for doing it your way, and I'll fix things with technology. How did you get past that, or how did you navigate your way through it, maybe?
Yeah, I think in general, my co-founder and I and the people we've hired do a really good job of coming at things from a perspective of curiosity, right? So it wasn't so much like, hey, I have this solution that is going to solve this problem you didn't know you had. It's like, hey, we've decided we want to add some value here. We think this might work, but you tell us, right? Like, is this something you want? What can we do to, alter it or adjust it to make it a better solution for you? And the product did evolve a lot because of that, right? So, even though that high level thesis was spot on, a lot of the ways that we had sort of implemented it early on were not right. That's not what the customer wanted. But because we came at it from this perspective of curiosity, from this place of curiosity, it allowed us to quickly iterate and evolve on the product in a way that'll, made it work for the clients. And I think the flip side of that gets to what you're, or, a related piece to that gets to what you're saying, which is that I think a lot of these brokers felt much more comfortable talking to us about it in that case, because I didn't seem like some arrogant asshole who was telling them how to run their business, right? They saw this as like, okay, these guys are trying to do something to help us. This is actually pretty similar to a problem I'm having. Maybe we can work with them here. And I think one of the other things that was helpful is I would say like the current conditions of the market, right? So if you look at what's happening in the brokerage space, the industry is growing, right? So the amount of revenue flow into brokerages is growing every year, but most of that revenue, the new revenue, is actually flowing to new businesses, right? To like new startups and small brokerages. So there's a lot of young men and women who are starting brokerages right now, who are coming at it from a very similar perspective to the way that you and I are building our businesses, right? Like maybe they're not hiring a bunch of engineers and building the software themselves, but they know that the industry is digitizing and that in 10 years, the brokers that are dominating the market are not going to look like the brokers that are dominating the market today. And so they're looking for technical solutions to these problems. So if someone comes along and saying like, hey, I'll basically try to build you the technical solution you're looking for, I think that is pretty appealing to them.
When you were starting early days and you were kind of talking about some of the changes you made, what was one of the what did you assume that was proven wrong? And I'm trying to get to almost like a smart way of asking what was one of the bigger mistakes, but more specifically, what assumption did you make that was wrong and proved to be relatively, I don't know, costly, but you know what I'm getting at with this? Like what was that moment or that thing?
So one assumption we made is, and I'm sure you guys have done similar things, like when you're building a tech company, especially if it's your first one, you kind of read about what other tech companies have done successfully, and you're like, all right, let's try to emulate that. And a lot of the big tech companies like Facebook, Twitter, right, they optimize around time on the website, right? Like getting people to spend a lot of hours on this website, lots of engagement. That's how you know it's working. And so we initially built our dashboard from that perspective, which is like, let's build a lot of things that we think will make them want to stay on the site and use it. And what we learned is like, no, they want to run their business. They don't want to waste time on this website. If we can give them a way to do everything they do on our web app programmatically through an API, they're actually going to be much happier, because then they can just click a button on their TMS or their QuickBooks account or whatever they're using to manage their business and get all of the same value, but without wasting as much time. And once we sort of made that perspective shift, it opened up a lot of really cool opportunities for us in terms of expanding and growing the business, right? By like integrating with a bunch of different TMS and accounting systems and making it easy to streamline workflows for our clients. And I think like it would have been great if we had discovered that, 6 months earlier, a year earlier, but that's just how it goes, right? You sort of figure these things out as you're developing the business.
You hit on two really interesting points there, and I think this is a good, for those who have started or early or thinking about starting a software business. I think there's two things I pull from that are totally true. One is that we become we almost want people to spend more time on our product because of the labor and the love that we put into it, and the love we have for the project. And we want you to spend time here because we did all this work. When really it takes a bit of wisdom and learning to say no. They kind of they want me in the background. They just want me out of the way. The less time they're on, in your case, the more success they're having. Hell, ours product too. It's like the faster they can get an order through, the better they're doing. So, right. and I think the other part of that is, when you're starting a technology business and it is your first one, and especially if you're not from the industry, what are you going to draw on from sort of a nomenclature? It's most likely going to be B2C product, and I think that's a real it's a trap that I think a lot of people fall into, and I think it's an obvious one, and I think it's okay in some ways because B2C and B2B are probably more homogenized now from a product perspective than they've ever been before, and that'll continue to increase. I don't know that it'll ever kind of go full, homogenization across the spectrum, but there's certainly B2B products look a lot more like B2C products and so forth. However, I think you can find yourself, in your case, you guys found metrics that didn't really align with, generally speaking, right. B2B in general doesn't really align to that there's not too many B2B products that align to that metric that I can think of off the top of my head. but it's all you've got to really go on. It's like you're kind of trying to grab this, okay, well, I know what this is like, and I know what this user experience is like, and I'm on Facebook every day. So you kind of got this sense of usability, this feedback loop, this is what we draw from what we know. So I think that's a great, I'm glad you used that example, because I think for any listeners, I think it's a good call out to just make sure you're not doing that, and I think understand how your product's going to work at the customer level.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it seems really obvious in hindsight, and it is really obvious in hindsight. And there's a lot of these things that are like super obvious in hindsight. But when you're going through it, you're kind of just like getting information wherever you can, right? And like you don't always like it comes back to what we were saying in the beginning. Like it's not just like why did this thing work for them? You gotta understand what is that fundamental reason that it worked for them, right? And see if that reason applies to you.
It's so tricky at the beginning, and when you're using, it's almost like you're listening to the wrong song or like the wrong radio station. It's like all you need to do is tune the dial and you go listen to the other radio station. Right. It's right there in front of you, but you don't know where the station is, and so it's like, this is the metrics we're going to tune to because this is all I know. And so this is what it is. And meanwhile, the data has been coming at you every day, all day. You're just not listening to it because you're not tuning towards that metric, that outlook, whatever it is. And it's really hard early days. And you can see why, honestly, second-time founders and beyond succeed at such a higher rate, because knowing that methodology or the right way to think about things, probably such a competitive advantage to being new. And again, this is my first technology startup as well, so we're brethren in this, and so it's the early days are so difficult for so many reasons, and one of them is just signal to noise, and if nothing else, right? Trying to figure out what that is.
You haven't built all the right mental models yet.
Yeah, and I honestly don't think I even have still. After all of this time, I'm still looking back at, I still feel like that we will make a mistake, and I'll say, okay, that was the one. Like, now we know what to do. Now we've got it now, and it's like, cool. All the mistakes are behind us. I mean, reasonably, and we are at the sort of the apex of wisdom, and from here on, it only gets better. It only goes up and to the right, and we've made every mistake there is to make anyway. So we'll just continue to learn from those. I think what's difficult is actually learning from mistakes, because it takes a lot of humility and I think maturity to admit that was a mistake in the past. Right. And so we often find ourselves repeating the same mistakes because of where it comes from. And there's just so many, I don't know, I think I find this a bit of a mindfuck, to be honest, in terms of like the mistake aspect and learning from them, because I do find myself repeating just with a different flavor. But if I look at it sort of core, it's like, no, I'm kind of in a program and on autopilot for a certain tool set of mistakes, it feels like. I'm almost like destined to continue to make these. And so then you got to build a structure to mitigate them almost, right?
Yeah. Like sometimes they seem like different mistakes, but after you've made it a few times, you realize like, oh, these are just multiple instances of this like higher level abstraction. And that's the mistake that I've been making.
Exactly.
And I think once you can like grab that pattern, it makes it easier to solve it. And, I think having co-founders helps a lot, because hopefully you guys are hardwired to make different types of mistakes, which makes it easy for you to sort of come to each other. Like Sean will call me out and be like, hey, dude, you do this a lot, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I see this pattern now. I'm going to like be smarter this time. And I think having someone that you can bounce those ideas with, you can sort of sanity check your decisions, adds a lot of value.
How has the relationship with you and your co-founder been throughout this journey? How would you sort of describe it?
It's been awesome. I can't imagine doing this with anyone else. You guys know, it's just like such a stressful job, and it takes over so much of your entire life, right? And everything you think about it, and there's so many things that could go wrong at different times, and you stress over it a lot. And I think if you were building a company either alone or with someone that you don't have an incredibly high degree of trust with, I think that would be infinitely harder than the situation I find myself in right now.
Yeah, I can't even think of the number of companies that I've seen that were just as reasonably as good as yours or mine, that failed as a result of just not having good co-founder. And the longer this thing goes, and the more you stress test that relationship, because you sure do. I can't even imagine, even from just like outside of the sort of the experiential process of, but just the actual execution. I can't imagine I can't imagine being a solo founder, first of all, and I can't imagine just being in a partnership to this level, and to what you said, just with something that you couldn't absolutely inherently trust to do the thing, that they have a superpower at doing, and just knowing that, what I always describe it as, you can turn your back and walk away and know with absolute certainty that that thing will be executed to an ability that far exceeds your own.
Yeah. Sean and I talk about it as these like two different types of trust. You have to trust the person's like benevolence, right? That they have your best interest at heart. They're never going to try to screw you. And that's important, but it's not sufficient, right? You also need to trust that they have an incredibly high degree of competency. So it's like, I have a lot of friends who I trust have my best interest at heart, but if I was like stuck in some foreign prison, I would call Sean and I would know that he's going to get me out of there. You know? So I think you need that level of trust with someone to start a company together, I believe.
Yeah, that's a good, I like that. And I feel like we would all do the same here. I do want to just flip it just in the interest of time, because I know I can get carried away on this stuff, and we'll talk about this for a very long time, because these topics are near and dear to me, and obviously I can speak, I don't know, it's firsthand. I feel like we're having a conversation amongst friends, but I do want to talk a little bit about, and I think our listeners would want to hear, so I'll say the date as I do here. So it's middle of May in 2022, and we are on the, everybody's freaking out around capital markets right now. It's a macro environment from hell. I mean, look, we've been here before. This too shall pass, but we live in a world with very, very short-term views and horizons. It feels like the world's going to end on any given day. So I think people are really struggling right now to try to see that, again, these things happen. This is a cycle, but I think it's hard right now for a lot of people. And I think what makes this hard is the uncertainty, but almost what seems to be certain is that things are going to get a little bit harder. And so, not to go down too much into that, but you guys have to think about these types of things. You have to think about these types of things from the risk profile of your customer, from the risk profile of their customers, quite frankly. And then you have to think, and I'm also interested in how things like interest rate and cost of capital is affected for you guys, and how you sort of mitigate that. So I know these are all huge conversations. We don't have enough time to check all of that off. But in terms of what's happening now, how does a company like yours, how do you have to prioritize responding or buttressing against what's about to happen or is happening currently? Or is it just business as usual?
No, I mean, it's definitely not business as usual, right? There's just like too much going on, right? And we're like a venture-backed tech company servicing the logistics industry that's reliant on the debt markets, and like the venture markets are, collapsing, like the private and public equity markets. The interest rates are rising. The freight market looks like it's in a recession. The whole economy looks like it might be in a recession. I think what is fortunate for our business is that there are a lot of competing effects, right? So yes, like interest rates rising tends to that increase our costs of service. But the flip side of it is that when interest rates rise, like most interest products rates, the cost of most interest-based products also rise, right? So as long as our cost relative to our competition doesn't get totally out of whack, it shouldn't meaningfully affect our gross margins, right? And given how early we are, we actually think that delta is going to continue to shrink, right? That our interest rates are going to get closer and closer to the sort of large incumbents that are in the space. So even in a rising interest rate environment, we believe that our gross margins will continue to improve. But the other side of that is that when interest rates are rising and banks are sort of like tightening their credit policies, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, it drives a lot of demand for a product like this, right? Because you have businesses who maybe didn't need this kind of support 6 months ago, but who now do need that kind of support because they don't know if their debtors are going to pay them on time. They're facing a little bit of financial instability themselves, or you have clients who used to work with banks who are now getting turned away because the bank lenders are tightening their credit policies, right? So you have these sort of competing effects that on net, I think over a reasonable time horizon, like 6 months plus, is actually beneficial for our business. There is the interesting problem of like the credit risk, right? And you had brought up too, which is like, are the clients going to be able to, what does the client's credit look like? What does the debtor's credit look like? We're actually not super concerned with the client's credit. We don't even do credit checks on the clients because we're able to see through the transaction to the debtor that's actually paying the invoice, right? So maybe the broker we're working with created their business last month, has no credit, but if they're moving a load for AB and Bev, like probably going to get paid because AB and Bev isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so our response to sort of this changing market condition is to be really, really careful about how we underwrite those debtors, right? And making sure that we are buying invoices from high quality debtors that can withstand this type of economic uncertainty and can make those payments on time today, tomorrow, next year, and so on.
I go back to that interest rate. That was interesting. So your theory on this is that, I guess basically is that your competitors in the space, I'm going to paraphrase this here, so just correct me if I'm wrong because I may have missed on this, is that your competitors in the space have higher costs organizationally as an operation? And are you suggesting that you guys, because of the way that you've, whether it's through sort of venture or some of the mechanisms and the way that you're funding the business, have the ability to stay more cost competitive as things go on? Is that what I understand that right?
No, so let me rephrase that. So these incumbents have been around for a while and they have a great track record. Some of them are like literally banks. So they're borrowing money today at a much, much lower cost than we are, right? And in a rising interest rate environment, theirs is already at the bottom. It can only really go up. For us, we've only been around for a couple of years, right? Our interest rate is falling like dramatically year over year. So in this rising interest rate environment, it's likely that we will still be able to get some reduction or at least like stay flat. So if you look at the relative to the competition, the deltas was huge last year. It's still pretty big. It's probably only going to get smaller as we grow. Right?
Interesting.
Because there's still a lot of room for us to improve our costs by showing the lenders like, look, here's another year that we didn't lose a penny, and this time we moved. We purchased like 5 times as much in invoices as we did last year, right? And so now instead of 2 years of track record, we got 3, right? And that's a meaningful difference. But for someone who's been around for like 25 years, having 26 years of data doesn't really move the needle.
That's super interesting, and that's a really great. This is a great conversation, sort of around the sort of the crisis and opportunity paradigm. It's like, this is as much as it's a potential crisis for some of your competitors in this environment, because like you said, they're already at the bottom. There is a place where maybe you guys have reached some equilibrium here on pricing as you kind of can bring that down. And it's actually interesting too to think about how hard that is at the beginning. Because look, we can from what factoring is, there's a lot of nice things that you can do and you can automate, but often getting in the door through these conversations is simply a rate conversation. We don't like it, we hate that it's commoditized, but that's the reality. And so you guys have had to be probably extremely aggressive on your interest from just a pure profitability perspective. That's kind of had to be a moot point at times, I'd have to imagine, for the greater good, while you're trying to build just put enough time behind you to basically allow you to have and build enough bandwidth from a customer base and spend to kind of create a going concern business with a going concern story to start reducing some of these rates and have these guys take you a little bit more, not more serious, that's not fair, but just where you become a little less of a risk, quite frankly, and worth doing business with to a higher degree, because there's just that much more money to be had.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some pressure on pricing from these sort of large incumbents. But one thing we found early on, which again was one of the reasons that we really leaned into this opportunity, is that there's a lot of opportunities to add value to the clients outside of just the financing, right? By automating many of their workflows, integrating with those other platforms to streamline that operation to the point where we've had clients move over to us in spite of us not being able to match rates, because it's made their ability to operate their business so much easier, right? And I think that's one of the things we're sort of leaning on as we move forward is what can we do to just make our clients' lives way, way easier so it doesn't just become a race to the bottom, right? Obviously, we want to do our best to continue to give them the best prices possible. And as our own cost of capital continues to fall, we will continue to be able to improve those rates for them. But we're in this space because we think there's an opportunity to do a lot more for their business than just provide the financing.
I think it's really interesting about this from a broker lens, and I use this generalization enough in the podcast that if people who have heard this before will know, hopefully, that this is more or less a generalization just for the sake of making this an easy soundbite to consume. But there's this, I feel like in some ways, like selling into brokerages, you have a better opportunity to actually sell around value and automation and these types of things. One of the really difficult things, and I don't know if it's because trucking has been commoditized, and so there's this kind of effect where They decide that everything else is commoditized too. But if I think of our own customer base, we sell to both brokers and carriers, and the broker sales process looks a little bit different because it's more around growth. Like if I just simply put this, like the simple framework is, it's about growth, and trucking companies are about operational excellence, aka cost savings. And so there's these and so I think it's actually interesting, and I think it's an interesting opportunity that you guys kind of have just through the profile of the customer in amongst this space, that you have a more growth oriented by comparison to the carrier, a customer. So when I'm kind of thinking about, as I said, the last piece around, well, of course we can sell because I'm projecting our own experiences onto you, basically, from working with the sector. And I'm like, we sell a TMS that I think in many ways is category leading in a lot of cases, and it comes down to sometimes price, where we might lose a deal for $500 a year on something that, and really it's like this thing will materially change your business compared to the other product that you're either on or going to decide to instead. But it's a pure dollars and cents thing. And this is a carrier, sale I'd be talking about here. I don't think we ever lose deals like that on the broker side in the same way, like for $50, or whatever it is.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's because like for a carrier to scale, they need to buy another truck.
Yeah.
Right. They have to it's difficult to scale that business quickly. Whereas like a broker who is operating their business really efficiently, very good at sales, is making sure they're not wasting time on things that, Rose Rocket or Axle could do automatically, then they're going to grow a lot faster, right? And they're going to see those benefits, right, in a way that a carrier often can't.
Yeah.
And I think as a result of that, you see a lot of brokers who are more growth oriented, who see like business expenses as investments rather than just expenses, and then are, as a result, are able to build their business a lot faster.
That's a perfect sound clip to wrap this bad boy up. B, that was really, really good, man. Thanks for taking the time. You speak really articulately. So I did not. I've had a baby that's been up a lot over the last few weeks, so I'm feeling pretty dumb today. So thanks for carrying the water in terms of just being smart today. Man, it's nice to see you again, and really, congratulations on the success you guys are having. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, anytime. Take care.
Cheers.
You can find Bharath on LinkedIn or check out Axle at axlepayments.com. And be sure to like and subscribe to Freight Famous.